So, Josh, my new bride likes Hallmark movies, particularly Christmas Hallmark movies. She works from home, and she'll have them in the background with no sound. So the other day, she tells me about this new reality show that will give anyone a chance to be cast in a Hallmark movie. I'm kind of excited. My theater days from when I was like a theater minor, and I'd love to revisit that. If only I was 20, maybe 25 years younger, it might work. And I said, I would have loved that if I was just a little bit younger. She said, well, you could be the grandfather. Ouch. Let's head to the back nine. Anyway, buddy, that kind of hit me hard.
You're a month into the new marriage and already reality set.
Well, this is why we are married, because we can zing each other like this. We've been doing this for 4 years. So we do have that kind of like take the shots and just deal with them. But it is true. Like there is a part of my back nine, you're going to laugh at me, that not regrets, but I was a theater minor, and there was a part of me that thought, if I hadn't gotten into broadcasting, maybe I'll go give this acting thing a shot. I was in a show every semester in college, and you know how much it's in my family. My sister's in the theater, and my mom has seen every Broadway show 14 times. So, and show tunes were playing in my house all the time. So it's one of those things where I wouldn't be like a Broadway guy. It was more like I was more like the actor doing plays and stuff like that. But I think I need to go back to it. I just don't know if I'm ready to be a grandfather. Cast? Do I have to be cast as a grandfather? Can I play a little younger?
I think you'd probably be the hot grandfather. I think that's what Beck was really meaning to say. But look, there are lots of people who, in all seriousness, and this is not serious, but in all seriousness, there are lots of people who have blossomed as actors or actresses by finding that niche of being that role, right? Think about people who have had, think about Harrison Ford, right? I'm watching him, right? He had obviously that great run in the Star Wars movies and the Indiana Jones movies, and now he's playing a 70-something psychiatrist on the show Shrinking, which I love, and he's terrific at it. You're not the 70-year-old.
The other thing about it is with AI, they could make me 25 years younger.
Of course they could.
Did it to Harrison Ford in the last Indiana Jones movie. Yep. They reversed him somehow, and it was him playing the part, and he looked like he was in his 40s. Like, it was crazy. So you can do that now. Maybe that's the key. I can go audition for the Hallmark movie. I could actually still be the leading actor, just use a little AI.
Do you want to be in a Hallmark movie, though? You have more substance than that.
Well, right? it is so funny. I meant to look up some titles.
How did you watch it with the sound off?
It's just like, I think it's just like her job teaching like from home is a grind, and it's just to have that in the background. And we laugh at it. Like it's hilariously cheesy. And you know what it is now? It is replaced, like, our generation had soap operas on during the day. Like, soap operas, I don't think soap operas are a thing. I think there's a couple still on, but there used to be like nonstop. Every station had them hour by hour. And now I think it's a thing that it's this Hallmark world and Lifetime movies. And they're like, instead of having to stay in a soap opera for weeks and weeks and months, it's like a 2-hour soap opera. That's what I think it is.
I feel like there are a bunch of writers in a room who, all right, did we hit this check mark and this on those kind of, because they're so formulaic.
Oh my gosh. It's the woman from New York who's a fashion photographer, and she gets lost in a town, and then she finds her way to a Christmas tree farm where some guy who's been working on the Christmas tree.
Working class.
He's been working on the Christmas tree farm. His parents owned it. It's third generation.
That's exactly it.
And then she stumbles upon him, and she can't find her keys because she dropped them somewhere in the farm, and then she's got to figure out how to stay one night, and they end up in the house by the fire, and she doesn't go back to New York for a while.
As you say it this way, it's not that dissimilar from your story with Beck. Really, we broke it all down.
Well, actually, never mind. There was a woman in our complex that called us. Not a Hallmark movie, because she was older. She goes, "You guys are like a romance novel."
There it is.
So it was the same type of thing.
Let's bring in
a better writer
who's a way better writer than that, shall we? Our guest today is an author named Denene Millner, and she is the creator and director of Denene Millner Books, which is a part of Simon & Schuster, and she has the mybrownbaby.com website and brand, which is and a blog, which is very critically acclaimed, and it kind of examines the intersection of parenting and race. And Dennis, because I've told you the story, I met Denene on a plane. We happened to be sitting next to her. We sitting next to each other on a plane. I was actually in a center seat, which never happens, but we were. And her story was so fantastic. So Denene, we're so glad you're joining us. Thank you for coming in. And you're more than welcome, and we're honored. the start of what intrigued me about you was your story about how you became an author. Do you mind starting there for us, please, and for our audience?
Sure. That was in 1993 or so. No, I'm sorry. My first book came out in 1997. So it was like 1996. I was a reporter at the Daily News in New York. I started out as a political reporter covering Giuliani and Dinkins, believe it or not.
Wow.
And then I went to entertainment, which is very much politics, just with people who sing. And I was covering a book called The Rules. And it was by these women who wrote this book about how to like club a guy over the head and drag him down the aisle before he realizes that he's there.
I remember that book, yeah.
And I wrote a story that basically questioned whether those rules would work for Black women, because I felt like a lot of the things that they were telling women to do were a little disingenuous and wouldn't necessarily work with the Black men that I knew. And so I wrote a story, and my editor at the time, I didn't realize she was going to do it, but she illustrated the cover she created a book that said, "Rules for the Sisters, Can Black Women Find True Love?" And she had one of my coworkers dress up in a Superman suit, and she created this mock book cover, put it on the cover of the Thursday section of the newspaper, of the Daily News. And when I got into work that day, I had 13 messages from people, 11 of them or 12 of them or 11 of them from readers asking where they could find Rules for the Sisters, because my God, I need to read this.
Oh, wow.
And then one from an editor at Miss Magazine saying, "Oh, I really love the way that you write. I'd love for you to recreate that story for us." And then the 13th message came from an editor at what was then William Morrow saying, "Hey, would you be interested in writing Rules for the Sisters?" And I had a book deal by 3:00 that afternoon.
Wow.
It doesn't happen that way.
That's
really doesn't. So I'm
amazing.
glad that it did for you.
So podcasters are like kind of, I guess you could say sometimes we're talking about things that could be in a book, right? So can you give us you can't give us the whole book, but what were some of the highlights that stood out that made that so popular, both from the article and then a transition to the book? What were some of the key takeaways, key tips that were in that?
So the original book said something to the effect of, "Don't accept a Saturday date after Wednesday because then you seem too eager." Another one was, "Don't talk too much on a date because a man doesn't like it when you're too talkative." And when I thought about the successful relationships that I was engaged at the time. When I thought about my mom and my dad and how they were as a married couple, how I thought about my then future in-laws and how they were as a couple, women were strong. They weren't sort of cowering and being quiet and demure. They were very, very quiet, very demure. That was not like I knew, and that was not the kind of men that we were attracting to us, who wanted us to be quiet and not speak and not express our opinions and to just sort of play games. And so for the Sisters Rules, I was very clear that there's no way that I'm going on a date and being quiet around a man. If he can't take my intelligence or my contribution to the conversation, then that's not the guy for me. And whatever man who is looking for a good woman shouldn't expect that out of a woman. And if a guy calls me on Saturday night and says, "Hey, I got D'Angelo tickets," I'm going to see D'Angelo, because Shaniqua will. So I'm go on that date. And so it's just sort of like a common sense approach to how to treat another human being like a human being, like you actually want to be with them, and not like how you're playing games and sort of tricking them into liking you.
So here's a twofold question then. How did it work? What kind of men then showed up when you and your friends and the people who were reading the book acted that way? And does that change? Has that changed a couple of decades later, as we are not young in our 20s, but are in middle age, both in terms of how women should act and how they should act, for how men should then react, or how men should act? What are they looking for? And does it also cross races as well?
I can tell you this, as a single woman, I got divorced I separated in 2017. It was final in 2018. It's 2024. So what's that,
Right.
like 7 years?
6-7 years, yeah.
And the way that people date today it may be different. You may be finding people on an app versus at a club or at a bar stool or at church. But the fact still remains that it's still hard out here. It's very hard out here for people to connect. But I, as an older woman, I'm just turned 56. I know what I want and what I don't want, and I'm still not willing to play those games, right? So if you can't take me having an intelligent conversation, asking questions, and more importantly, if you don't express any kind of interest in me when you sit down at the table with me and all you can do is talk about yourself
Mm-hmm.
and you're not interested in anything that I have to say or what I do, that's a no, that's a non-starter for me. I'm walking away. You won't hear from me again because and when I was younger, I would try, right? I would do, oh, well, maybe if I go on a second or a third date, yeah, I can make this work. At 56 in the back nine, I
Yeah.
am trying to make it work, right? Like and that's not saying that I don't try, but if off the rip, I can see that you're just going to talk about yourself. You're just going to be interested in the things that, that interest you, and you have no kind of regard for what it is that I want or what I bring to the table or getting to know me, just simply getting to know me. Some of the conversations that I've had on Tinder and Hinge, like I can tell off rip from the email exchanges. Like if I'm asking all the questions and he's just answering the questions about himself and there's no engagement, like, what do you do? Or what do you like? Or where do you go in the city that you appreciate? If I don't hear that, that's it, that's done. Because it's a two-way conversation, right? It's a two-way street. And I like to think that I'm very open. I like to think that I'm very interested, and I expect the same from the person who is talking to me. And that I think is the biggest challenge, right? Is that's the way that it was when I was younger, but I was more willing to try and make it work. And these days I'm not interested in that.
Boy, Denene, that's a common theme. We've had a lot of people talk about dating on the back nine and knowing your boundaries, knowing what you will take and what you won't take from people. But the most common theme is exactly what you just said, is that we tell men all the time, if you're going on a first date, be the one who's the reporter asking the questions. And I like that you're a journalist, right? And Josh and I are former journalists too. So be the one that asks the questions, that digs deep, that wants to find the story of that other person. And that other person will ask you questions if you guys have the chemistry that's necessary. So I love that. I think that's absolutely terrific advice. What about navigating the children through all that, like through your dating life and things like that? How challenging has that been for you in the transition? We talked before the show. We have kids that are similar ages. I actually was divorced at almost exactly the same time, just got remarried a couple weeks ago. So I've been on this journey of dealing with the kids, but I'm interested to hear, Josh and I have been through similar things, how your journey's been with that.
Congratulations first on
Thank
I
you.
I, I love a good love story, and I really love Christmas movies too. And one of my best friends actually writes them. So
Oh, I
There you go.
love it. So how far off was I, by the way? And then we'll get back to the other question. Was I?
spot on, spot on.
Okay.
It hasn't been difficult. Like my ex-husband remarried rather quickly. He was engaged, I think, before we were even officially divorced or moved in with her, at least. That wasn't the route that I chose to go. I felt like I had some healing to do. I had to do some reevaluations about what it was that I wanted, what I didn't want, what my boundaries are, what it was that I was looking for, not just with a partner, but with myself. And I found that the men that I was dating weren't patient when it came to that, right? It was,
Mm-hmm.
this one's a good one. I'm trying to lock her down. And I had three different guys violate I'm not trying to get married. I don't want to be married again. I don't. I feel like I can be in love without sort of submitting to the role that inevitably I feel like ends up being a woman's role inside of a marriage. And so I don't, I like my home. I like my space. I like my autonomy. I like my independence. And I would very much like to keep it this way. I don't want to serve anyone. And perhaps I could build something that looks like something that my partner and I would want to build versus what society expects of us all. And when I find that guy, it'll be wonderful. My daughters were a little reticent about the relationship that their father created with his now wife. I think that they felt like it was a little fast, and I was cognizant of that. I was cognizant of introducing my children, even though they were pretty, when we divorced, my older daughter was in college, freshman in college, and my younger daughter was a sophomore in high school. And I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with the new dynamic. And I was kind of running those two trains at the same time, right? Like, what is comfortable for me? What does single life look like for me? What does a relationship look like for me in the future? And then how do I manage my daughters so that they experience minimal impact of the breakup of their parents? We were married for 22 years and together for 25. Their entire lives, all they knew was me and their dad. And so I wanted to make sure that they were good. So I didn't bring a whole lot of men around
Hmm.
them. One guy that I dated for about four years or so that they know, and the interactions between them were pretty limited. I was around his kids. He knows my girls. My girls know his name. They know him when he comes. But I don't really mix the two. If I'm going to be with someone and that person is going to be my man, then he will be introduced to my children as such. But until then, they don't need to know my bench.
It's so interesting, Denene, that you talk about it in that way, because I think there are so many different perspectives about, do you want to get married? Do you not want to get married? I've certainly had relationships with people who do and did, and others who don't, and I'm kind of neutral about it, and I think, though, in a different kind of relationship, I might be, yes, I absolutely want to get married, but for me right now, I kind of share where you are. And the fact of parenting is important. And I know that's part of your writing as well. You've written novels for adults and a lot of novels for children and young adults. And a lot of your focus is on parenting. And some of our guests and some of our audience, even that as they're our age, they have young kids as well. And so I think the question I would pose to you about that is pivoting a little bit to how modern people can be better at parenting, and especially modern men. A lot of our audience is men. And is there anything specific about the position that middle-aged men hold after what we've accomplished and achieved in our lives that can be impactful on parenting, whether we're talking about parenting our own young kids as young kids or our own grown kids as grown kids, both in their journeys as adults and as they become parents themselves?
The biggest thing is be present, right? Like, it's not just the mother's job to help the children manage their emotions, particularly in a breakup. It's not just the mother's role to continue on in the way that she may have during the marriage, with making sure that the social calendars are together and making sure that the home is together and making sure that the kids are, their education is together, doctor's appointments, that you I children were created by two people, most traditionally, right? And what I've found, and I don't want to disrespect you guys because I am talking to two men, and maybe it was different in your relationships and your marriages, but I've found that the men in my life, male friends, husbands of friends, sort of take a back seat to the everyday care and upkeep of the children and of the household and of what it takes to make sure that these human beings become smart and engaged and independent. And all of those things tend to fall on the shoulders of the women. And it would be wonderful if men understood that stepping up and being emotionally available to their children in the way that the women are, and stepping up and taking care of sort of the physical day-to-day things, would help the children feel like their parent is engaged. And not to talk about my ex-husband, but I'm just going to give you a little example. The other day, my daughter wanted to see her father. She doesn't have a car here. She stays in DC and she's staying here for the holidays. And her dad lives about 90 minutes away. So she was trying to get her sister to drive up with her to where her dad lives. Her sister already had plans. And so if she would have driven the 90 minutes, it would have had about an hour to engage, and then they would have had to turn right back around. It's a lot of driving for someone who wasn't planning on doing all that driving to begin with and had plans for the later in the day. And so my younger daughter was about to call her father to tell him that she couldn't see him. And I was like, well, why can't he just drive here? He has a car. Why can't he come to see you? And my daughters, I think, are so used to their father not doing anything that takes him out of his normal routine, not doing anything that takes him off of what he wants to do, that it doesn't even occur to them to ask the question, hey, I can't come to see you. Can you come to see me? Maybe you could come to Atlanta and we can go to lunch. Or maybe you could come to Atlanta and we could go to the museum. Or it doesn't occur to me to be in the same state with my children and not see them. It doesn't occur to me to not find my way to my kids, especially if they can't get to me. And so that's an example of, like, hey, step outside of yourself and understand that your child needs you. Your child wants you. Your child wants to engage with you. And it's you as a parent, no matter how old they are, it's you as a parent who needs to understand that you're still the parent. And so it's still on you to make sure that you are the one who's reaching out to them. And so if there's any advice, I'd step outside of yourself.
So I think that's so important. And I can say from my own personal experience that I was the other way. There was a lot of nurturing in me with my girls. And I do think there are men out there that do that. But I think the lesson is important. I think it's important to tell men that they need to be a part of the nurturing of the kids from day one. Don't take a back seat. And I can tell you, and I don't need to get into a lot of details here on the show. Josh will tell you, like, I never took a back seat. I was involved in every aspect of and I still am. My daughter called me last week for some financial advice, right? Like, I'm constantly in there for different things that they need. And again, I think just the message from that is not about me. It's about men out there need to be aware that isn't just the woman's role, that they need to be there. Because here's the thing, especially when you have daughters, that's the example that they are going to use when they go out. I'm not saying they want to date their dads, but I'm saying what a man should be and what a man should be like, some of the qualities of a guy. So that's what you want your daughters in particular, and you want your daughters to have, that you want them to know what it is to be a nurturing, emotionally available, solid guy, right? Like, that's what you want for your daughters.
Absolutely. My dad is still alive. He's 89. And when he is anywhere in the vicinity of me, I feel absolutely protected. I feel protected. I feel loved. I feel he's engaging. He opens doors. He pulls out seats still. He doesn't walk out of the house without making sure that he has on his dress shoes and his dress slacks and his fedora. And he won't let me pump the gas. He won't let my daughters pump the gas. He won't, 89 years old, and he's still like, don't you get out the car. Let me come around and open this door for you. Because that's the way that men are supposed to treat you. And those are just little physical things that speak to a larger sort of engagement, a larger sort of concern for me and my daughters, right? Like my dad packs a gun. He's a gun owner. We come from a home of a family of gun owners. I don't own a gun. Actually, I do. I just bought one. But for the longest time, I didn't have a gun. But, like when I thought about my family, my dad always had guns. My uncle always had guns, and we always felt protected. They were for the protection of the family. And it didn't just come from owning a gun, it came from making sure that we had food on the table, making sure that the teachers got talked to when he felt like they weren't sort of engaging with me in a way that he felt that they needed to engage me. He was always there. And so that's what I was looking for in a mate. And it was like that maybe when the kids were little, but the point is that can't stop. I am still being parented and I'm 56 years old. Right.
One more point on that. I was just going to say, I just did some reflection on this. And the other side of it, Denene, is that most of the women that I've been in, my first marriage and certainly my new bride, had really solid dads. Like, I think about the women that I have been attracted to and been in relationships with over the years of my life. It really just hit me, actually, as you were saying that. And it has been women who had really solid role models as fathers. In fact, maybe not the greatest role model as moms, but they had solid, and I'm making a blanket statement, but really solid dads.
I think that it matters. It
Yeah.
absolutely matters. It matters for you, for your dad to model for you what a good man is. Because just like we started this whole part of the conversation saying that like we want to make sure what the way that we act is how what our daughters will go looking for, right? The way that I am, my daughters cook like me. They make sure that the house is in a particular order like me. They dress like me. They learn those things from me. They also learn from their father, protect grandfather, protection, understanding when someone is putting you first. And it's important to get that from your father. It really is. And not saying that you're going out and looking for your father, but the
Right.
quality coming from him
Yep.
are important.
There's so much here that we have mined, and we're grateful for that. I want to ask one question because you've been generous with your time, and we'll let you go. But you're coming back to your writing, which is how you and I first bonded. You've written a lot of children's books. You wrote a lot of books with celebrities and stars like Steve Harvey and Taraji Henson. But your first solo adult novel came out last year. It's called One Blood, and it received great reviews, and I got to hold it in my hands, and it was wonderful. A couple of questions on this. When you look back at your journey to get to this point, when you have that book physically in your hands or you see it on a shelf in a bookstore and you know that it's your art that has come to life, what is that view? What is that feeling that you get that when you have that tactile object in your hands?
It never gets old. It never, ever, ever gets old to walk into a bookstore and see your book sitting on a shelf. It never gets old when someone sends you an email or they notice you on a train or out and about and they say, you wrote that book and I really like that book. Or they reach out to you on social media and they say, I just read this chapter and I want to throw the book across the room because I didn't like what that character did or that this particular passage made me cry. It never gets old to see your work out. The beauty of One Blood, though, is that it introduced me in a lot of ways to myself. It was a story that now that I think about it has been percolating since I was a little kid and found out, and maybe we're about to enter into a whole nother story that may be a little too long for us to discuss at this point. I don't know how much time you have, but I'm adopted and found out when I was 12 that I'm adopted. I found the papers snooping in my parents' room and ended up not telling them that I knew. And this book is sort of based on that kind of nugget. And while I was writing the book, I actually found my birth mother just out of the blue. And she lived, get a load of this, in the little town that I moved to when I moved from New York to Georgia, a little town called Snellville, Georgia, out in North Georgia. She had been living there the entire time that I was
Oh my
there.
God.
And you ended up there just randomly.
Randomly.
Wow.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
incredible.
She passed away in 2017. I actually found her through her birth records and her death certificate, but she's buried right there in Snellville. Yeah. And so I found all of this information while I was writing One Blood, which is it's a book divvied up into three parts. A mother who has her baby and has that baby taken away, the mother who raised that baby, and the baby as a mother in her own right. And it's sort of discussing secrets and womanhood and the ways that, the mothering that you do and whether or not it's nature versus nurture. And all of it spurred from my desire to sort of get a hold of the story of my own adoption and sort of speculate what may have happened. And then I ended up finding out what actually happened while I was writing it.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface with you, Denene. We're going to have you come back and talk about that story when we talk about. I have two adopted siblings, and they're who are much younger than I am, and so I didn't grow up in the same house, but they're absolutely my brother and sister, and so there's so much about their journey and everybody's journey who comes from that kind of a background, as well as everything here about parenting that you get into in many of your books and your stories, and all of the things that you're talking about with the role of men alongside that. So incredibly grateful. This was, I knew you were going to be terrific. I didn't know exactly how terrific. And there's
great.
so much here.
Great.
So thank you so much for joining us, Denene.
Well, this chance encounter on an airplane brought us here. And I'm so grateful for you for following up and then inviting me on your beautiful show. I'm deeply grateful and appreciative.
As are we.
Thank you
Denene.
so much, Denene.
Take care.
Great
We'll
to
see you
meet
soon.
you.
Well, every now and then, Dennis, when we do these, different things show up that we may not have been expecting. That was not at all what I was expecting this to be. And it was every bit as wonderful, if not more so, than I thought it would be.
Well, we talk about our spirituality, and there was a reason why you sat in that middle seat and you had that opportunity. Like, you can believe in God, you can believe whatever your superpower is, but I believe that you were put there for a reason, and she was put in our life for a reason to be able to do this and share that really compelling message across the board. Like, there's so much there, and we will have to have her back. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about it as we start season 6, the fact that we shouldn't hesitate to have really good guests come back at some point.
Yeah, especially if they're talking about building on what they've talked about or other things. I mean, we're just scratching the surface of the idea of adoption here. Right?
Exactly my point. Yeah, I mean, we're not going to rehash anything that we already did, but when you know that there's so many layers to go through, and we certainly had that with her.
So let's talk about some of the things that she did talk about in this episode. And one of them that I think was interesting was the idea, talking about how her ex-husband, it didn't occur to them or to him to go see his daughters or for the girls to even ask. And she's right, 1,000%. I believe in everything she says. I think we both tried to show up for our daughters. I know lots of people for whom it's very difficult sometimes to break through the competing narrative, right? I mean, in a divorce, often there are shared truths, and then each participant in that relationship has a different version. They may be somewhat close, they may not be, about kind of what happened, who's responsible for what. And I know lots of people, lots of guys who have dealt with ex-spouses who may be controlling or whatever it is, but they have their narrative, and it's difficult for them to break through. In my own relationships, the women I've had serious relationships with, I think of 3 main ones before my current one. And in those 3, all of them had mothers who were either unreliable or absent. One of them's mom died when she was like 11. And their fathers were not entirely able to break through the competing narrative from their ex-spouses, or even to show up the one who was now a single father and a widower, to break through, and how that affected all 3 of those women in their adult life. And so my point is that even as Denene's prescription there is, in my view, entirely correct, I know that some guys struggle with trying to break through the competing narrative, especially if it's coming from a woman and an ex-wife who is pretty emphatic and maybe not all that gracious about hearing what the other side, what the husband side, the father side might be.
Well, as we talked about on our last episode, and I will, with Colette and Laura, and I will reiterate this, I'm not going to say that I did this 100%, but I will say, from my perspective, any ex, whether it's the man or the woman, that spends any time asserting blame to the kids, that person is categorically not a good person if they are doing that. If they are positioning themselves as the winner or someone better or all of those kinds of things.
Or just pointing fingers.
Or pointing fingers in particular, right? Accusing the other one, then that is an issue. I went out of my way to not do that. And I could have, but I didn't do that. And I think in retrospect, I'm grateful because both my ex and I have good relationships with our kids, because we went on our own paths and we were both showed up for them. And I think the key point here is what we heard from actual therapists is, as hard as it is when you're going through a divorce, you do not assign blame. You do not denigrate the other one, and you don't say things that make because it's your kid's father or it's your kid's mother. And that is the situation where I mean, again, it's a hard lesson to learn. I 100% admit that I was not great at it out of the gate. I probably wasn't perfect on this, but man, if I could give anybody a lesson who's going through this, it would be that.
And what I would say to the guys, I agree with you. What I would say to the guys who are having difficulty because their ex is not playing by the same rules and maybe not quite as gracious is keep showing up for your kids. Be the bigger person if you need to be bigger. Be the person that you want to be. Drive towards that relationship that you want to have with your kids. Even if they're not hearing it right now, they will.
That's such a good
They'll
point.
Understand it, and they may not get it at 20 or 23 or 26. They may not get it until 30 or 40 or maybe even after you're gone. But it's still important for them to hear you and for you as the man, as the ex-husband, as their father, to be consistent with your message. You love them. You're there for them. As Denene was iterating, that you're providing that sovereign masculinity that allows them to feel safe and secure in who they are as they grow into their own person. It's really important for the father to be that role and play that role.
And I will say one more thing that she said that ties this all up in a little bit of a bow is what her ex did. And he shouldn't have done this, because I really believe very strongly in this, is that you do have to, especially if you're married for over 20 years, take some time to yourself. You cannot jump right into another relationship. I made that mistake big time. And then I did take the time to get myself right before I got into this one. And it set me up for where I am now. I would never, ever have been healthy enough to have the relationship I have with my new wife had I not taken that year plus to take care of some shit, like to really take care of some shit, some mental problems and all kinds of different things that were going on. So I didn't do that right out of my divorce. I made that mistake and I went down a really bad path. So again, sounds a lot about me, but I'm just doing it so that I can tell people, like, man, don't jump right into something new. Don't jump right into something new.
Well, this is pretty meaty stuff, and we're here as we're dropping it on Christmas Eve. So maybe if you're sitting out there, maybe think about this as a way, if you're in this situation, to make it a New Year's resolution if you want to. But for now, go out and watch a Hallmark movie, right?
Well, that's what we started with that, so we're going to end with that. I love you bringing it full circle. After you listen to this heady episode, go watch a cheesy Hallmark movie.
You'll feel better.
Or a cheesy Christmas movie.
Yeah, cheesy Christmas movie. Elf, perhaps. Or
Christmas Vacation.
Bad Santa is one of my favorites.
Christmas Vacation is the best.
And most of all, have a great holiday season. We hope you're surrounded by a lot of friends and family, and know that we're sending you all of our best for the season and the year ahead. And we look forward to seeing you very soon. A next episode of The Back Nine.